While it's easy to move data around the pivot table field's list panel, there are times when you may want to limit your data to, for example, just quarter one. As we saw when we were filtering data in a table, you could click the drop-down list here and select to see just quarter one's data. However, there is an easier way still of doing this, and you can do it using what are called slices. I'll make sure first of all that I'm inside the pivot table, so I'll click inside it, and from the Pivot Table Tools Analyze tab on the ribbon, I'm going to click Insert Slicer. And I'm going to choose the slices for quarter and for locations, because this is the primary data that I have in this pivot table, and I'll click OK. And these are the slices. What slices allow you to do is to click on, for example, quarter one to see only the data for quarter one. And we're doing this in a very visual way. If we want to clear this filter, we can just click here to clear it, and we're seeing again quarters 1, 2, 3, and 4's data. If we want to see two or more items, first of all, I can click on quarter one, and if I want to see quarter three as well, I can hold the Control key down on my keyboard and click quarter three, and that will show me those two quarters. And I can add quarter four by Control clicking on it. Now, when you create a pivot table in Excel, you can use the Design tab options here to format your pivot table, and you can format it in lots of different ways. In a similar way, you can format your slices. So with a slicer selected from the Options tab here, I can choose to color my slices. So I can make one of them green, for example, and one of them red. Slices give you the ability to view the data in the pivot table exactly the way you want to see it, so that you can answer the questions that you have of your data. You can also, if you want to, use a slicer to filter the data even if the data that you're filtering is not available or visible in the pivot table. I'm going to click back in the pivot table, and again from the Pivot Table Tools Analyze tab, I'm going to choose Insert Slicer. And let's add one for salesperson, and I'll click OK. Now the salespeople are not listed in this pivot table, but we can limit the data that we're seeing to the results that they actually contributed to. So I could select these three salespeople, and the data that we're seeing now in the pivot table is just the results that those three people contributed to. So we're filtering our pivot table by a field that's not even visible in it. Pivot tables get their data from the underlying table, so if you make changes to the data in the table, they will flow through to the pivot table. If for some reason the changes don't flow through, you can right-click on the pivot table at any point and click Refresh, and then that will refresh the pivot table to show the updated data. It's important that you never delete this sales data because it's being used by the pivot table, and if you delete it, the pivot table will fail.